Hi there. Yeah, I'm Dave Kramer, and in the wake of the earthquake, my wife and I wrote a 5.5-page account of our experiences starting at the World Series and then the saga of getting home from the World Series that night, and a couple of remembrances after the fact. I want to note that my wife Barbara and I both worked for labor unions, so you will hear various references to that fact as I read this. And this is a letter to all of our family and friends, many of whom are not in the Bay Area, so there are going to be things that are obvious to you because you are when I explain that BART means Bay Area Rapid Transit, etc. Okay, to all our family and friends. First, we would like to say how much we appreciate your concern and calls about our safety in the recent Bay Area earthquake. Barbara and I are fine. Our home suffered no damage at all. 3 combs fell off a shelf in the bathroom and a closed door sprung open. We didn't even suffer a power outage. Fortunately, none of our friends or fellow workers were injured, although some had damage to their homes. A number of facilities where our union's members work have been damaged and are closed at least temporarily and in some cases undoubtedly permanently. We thought we would share our experience on the night of October 17, 1989, in part because it will make interesting reading and also out of our need to describe and record it. Barbara and I, along with a friend, Mark, were at Candlestick Park in San Francisco awaiting the start of the 3rd game of the Bay Bridge World Series between the Oakland A's and the San Francisco Giants at 5:04 p.m. Tuesday, October 17, 1989. The A's had won the first 2 games played at the Oakland Coliseum. Go A's. We had taken BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, from Oakland under the bay to downtown San Francisco and then caught a bus to the ballpark. This took about 45 minutes and had the advantage of avoiding traffic created by 62,000 baseball fans in addition to rush hour commuters. Our seats were in the upper deck, the 3rd tier of the stadium, high in the sky. When the quake struck, we first thought the stadium was rocking with fan enthusiasm and foot stomping. But we immediately realized that we're feeling much more than vibrations from the fans. This quake has been described as building in intensity for about 15 seconds. That's right, it sure did. We looked up to see the poles which support the stadium lights swaying and vibrating, and we knew we were experiencing an earthquake. It was very scary, but we had at that point no idea of the magnitude. Thousands of fellow fans were standing up, nervously talking, and looking up at the lights. Barbara and I had mirror image reactions to it. Immediately, my adrenaline went from 0 to the max, and I jumped up, and then began de-escalating. She, on the other hand, responded with initial calm followed by escalating anxiety, i.e., let's get out of here. Immediately after the quake, some fans cheered, gave a big round of applause, and started chanting, "Rock the A's." Then the public address system announced, in the event of an emergency, people in the upper deck should proceed to the nearest exit. People in the lower stands should proceed to the field. I thought, didn't we just have an emergency? What is an emergency? I looked over to the section where Mark was sitting. He was about 10 sections away from me, and it was empty. I wondered why had they panicked and we hadn't. There was a nervous calm throughout the stands with a steady trickle of people leaving. Ball players, their families, media, and police were milling around on the field. In my de-escalating adrenal state, I was sitting down, relaxing my grip on my seat and wondering when the game would start. I noticed that the stadium had lost electrical power, no lights, scoreboard, etc. I had conflicting thoughts, such as, we're waiting for the power to be turned on. I was also wondering, who's in charge here? No one wants to take responsibility for calling off the World Series. The silence from officialdom was deafening and sapped our confidence in, quote, those in charge, unquote. However, this silence, along with the fact that there was no actual collapse of the stands, also contributed to the absence of panic. About the time I'm wondering when the game is going to start, Mark shows up and informs us that the bolts holding the roof sections together above where he was sitting had snapped loose and fallen into the crowd, along with small pieces of concrete. That did it. We decided to make our way down to terra firma. We walked down the stationary escalator from the 3rd deck to join a crowd of several thousand others milling around the gates. At this point, Barbara declares that she doesn't care what they do, she's not going back in there. Mark shares her view, having seized a piece of the debris from his section of the stands as a souvenir. I am somewhat less willing to surrender the World Series to this event. Many fans, including Mark, had radios, although very few stations were on the air. After 5 or 10 minutes of listening for news, the first reports of the severity of damage began to be broadcast. When the announcement of the collapse of a section of the Bay Bridge came through, the flow of fans leaving increased to a mass exodus, and finally the cancellation of the game was announced. We walked around the outside of the stadium to where the buses were parked, engaging in much negative speculation about how we were going to get out of there and how we were going to get home. With the Bay Bridge damaged, the other bridges in an unknown condition, no car anyway, and BART shut down, we thought we were at least stranded in San Francisco for the night. We boarded a standing room only bus and started downtown. Since the condition of the freeways was unknown, the bus stayed on surface streets, 3rd Street primarily, and featured gridlock with thousands of cars, buses, and trucks, no street lights, building lights, or most importantly, traffic lights. The entire city of San Francisco and much of the rest of the Bay Area had lost all electricity. But humans are inventive creatures. From the bus, we saw a pickup truck pulled up on the sidewalk with its headlights shining into through the window of a darkened bar so patrons could continue to drown their fears in alcohol. High on our personal list of heroes that night were the bus drivers and the police directing traffic. During the ride downtown, we were hunched over people's radios and passing snippets of information around to fellow passengers. The radio announced that there were free ferry rides to the East Bay would be leaving from the ferry building on the Embarcadero. There was still hope of getting there. When we arrived downtown, the bus let us out at Market Street and we headed down Market Street for the ferry building. This was one of the most memorable experiences of this memorable night. Market Street is a main street in San Francisco. It is wide with traffic lanes, trolley tracks, and subway stations, as well as a great deal of construction in progress. It is bordered on both sides by high, modern, and old, ornate office buildings, and it was completely dark except for occasional dim emergency lights in a few buildings and a near night sky above the canyon of the office buildings. There were many people on the street who could better be heard than seen. Many seemed to be wandering aimlessly. The sidewalks were littered with broken glass and building facade and were cordoned off. Every so often we would encounter clumps of people standing clustered around radios listening for news. One individual did pass us with a large boombox on his shoulder blasting rap music. I don't know if he was oblivious or trying to make a statement. We saw one group sipping hopefully fine wine from stemmed glasses on the sidewalk. There were long lines of people at all the phones. The phones were still working amazingly. The subway stations were now menacing black holes in the ground. Because of the debris and the construction projects, it took care to walk in the darkness without stumbling or injury. Periodically, emergency vehicles would scream by us on the way to another crisis. The scene at the ferry building was one of frightening disappointment. There was a huge crowd of people gathered beneath the Embarcadero freeway in front of the ferry building. This freeway is a double-deck freeway just like the Cypress structure in Oakland, which had collapsed, killing and injuring an as yet unknown number of people. The Embarcadero freeway has since been declared unsafe. It has damage in the same supports that failed on the Cypress structure. The street was dark and flooded because of a broken water main, and the smell of gas was like walking into the kitchen with all the burners turned on and none of them lit.